If you were forced to witness an act of pure cruelty, would you drive past or would you stop? Prepare yourself for a heartbreaking journey that will restore your faith in humanity's capacity for extraordinary kindness when it matters most. On a rain-soaked evening in Vermont, Mark Donovan drove his pickup truck along a deserted country road. The 40-year-old carpenter was returning from a long day at a construction site. His thoughts focused on the warm meal waiting at home, rather than the dismal weather surrounding him. What happened next would forever change his life. Headlights illuminated a sedan ahead, its passenger window rolling down despite the downpour, and then the unmistakable silhouette of something being thrown onto the road. Even through the curtain of rain, Mark recognized the tumbling shape instantly. A dog being discarded like trash before the sedan sped away into the night. This dog, a small matted bundle of wet fur, would come to be known as Hope, though in that moment, as her body rolled across the wet pavement, nothing about her circumstances suggested any hope at all. Rain pelted her motionless form as the sedan's taillights vanished around a curve. 10 miles away, Dr. Josephine Rivera organized supplies in her small veterinary clinic, unaware that her evening plans would soon be dramatically altered. At 35, she had opened her practice just 2 years ago after leaving a prestigious urban hospital, seeking the connection with patients that had been missing in her previous position. Mark slammed on his brakes, activating his hazards as he grabbed his flashlight and jumped from the truck. "Please be alive," he whispered as he approached the small, crumpled form on the roadside, his heart pounding against his ribs. The beam of Mark's flashlight found the dog lying motionless, except for the shallow rise and fall of her ribcage. As he knelt beside her, Mark noticed something that intensified his anger: a worn collar with no tags, suggesting this was a deliberate abandonment rather than an accident. Mark moved cautiously, expecting the injured animal might snap from fear or pain. Instead, Hope remained frighteningly still, only a soft whimper escaping as his hands gently assessed her. "It's okay, little one," he murmured. "I've got you now." As his hands carefully checked for obvious injuries, Mark catalogued the damage with growing outrage. Fresh wounds from the impact overlaying older scars and signs of neglect. This wasn't a beloved pet. This was a creature who had known only cruelty. The injustice burned in his chest as he lifted Hope into his arms. The sudden touch roused Hope from shock, and her eyes fluttered open to meet Mark's concerned gaze. There was no aggression, just profound weariness that suggested this final betrayal was merely the culmination of a life defined by human cruelty. Something in that resigned gaze struck Mark deeply, and he silently promised, this dog would not only live, but would know kindness. With Hope carefully arranged on his passenger seat, Mark faced an urgent question: where to go? The nearest emergency vet clinic was in Burlington, almost 40 minutes away. Remembering Dr. Rivera's small practice was closer, he decided to try there first, hoping she might still be in the office despite the late hour. Rain hammered against the windshield as Mark drove, one hand maintaining gentle pressure on Hope's most severe wounds. Throughout the journey, he talked continuously in soothing tones, a stream of gentle words to anchor the injured animal to life. Twice during the drive, Hope's eyes opened, meeting his with that same unsettling calm. As Mark's truck pulled into the small parking lot of Valley View Veterinary Clinic, he was relieved to see lights still on inside. Before he could exit his vehicle, a woman in scrubs appeared at the door, clearly preparing to leave for the night. When she spotted Mark emerging with the broken form of Hope cradled against his chest, she immediately held the door open, her expression shifting from surprise to focused concern. "I'm Dr. Rivera," she said simply, guiding them to an examination room without hesitation. "What happened?" As Mark placed Hope gently on the table, their eyes met briefly over the injured dog's body, two strangers connected by shared determination that the cruelty inflicted on this discarded life would not have the final word. "Someone threw her from a moving car," Mark explained, his voice catching as Dr. Rivera's hands moved efficiently over Hope's injuries. "I saw it happen about 15 minutes ago on Route 7. Her response wasn't shock, but rather a focused intensity that suggested such cruelty wasn't unfamiliar in her work. Then let's make sure they don't get what they wanted," she said quietly, reaching for an IV line. "Let's make sure she lives. Multiple lacerations, likely internal bleeding, at least 2 broken ribs, and her left front leg is definitely fractured." Dr. Rivera assessed, maintaining professional composure despite the anger visible in her eyes. Hope remained unnervingly still during the examination, flinching only slightly when particularly painful areas were touched, a response that worried both humans more than if she had struggled. Animals in severe shock often became eerily compliant, but Hope's almost complete surrender suggested something deeper, a psychological resignation born from long-term abuse. As Dr. Rivera inserted an IV line with practiced precision, she directed Mark to assist, quickly determining he was steady enough to help despite his lack of medical training. They worked with surprising synchronicity, Mark holding pressure on wounds while the veterinarian prepared medications and fluids. "The next few hours are critical," Dr. Rivera explained as she injected pain medication into the IV. "Her body temperature is dangerously low, and she's lost a significant amount of blood." For the next 2 hours, they fought for Hope's life with focused intensity, the storm outside fading to background noise against the more immediate battle taking place on the examination table. Mark followed Dr. Rivera's instructions without hesitation, handing instruments, holding Hope still during painful procedures, and maintaining a steady stream of gentle reassurance to the injured animal. Though they had been strangers an hour earlier, crisis had forged an immediate partnership between them, bound by their shared determination that this discarded dog would survive. Shortly before midnight, Hope's condition suddenly deteriorated, her already weak pulse becoming erratic, her breathing increasingly labored. "We're losing her," Dr. Rivera said, the monitor showing dropping oxygen levels despite their interventions. Her face tightened with determination as she reached for emergency medications. "Not today," she said firmly. "She didn't survive being thrown from that car just to die on my table. I need you to maintain chest compressions while I administer this epinephrine." As Mark's hands established a careful rhythm of compressions, mindful of Hope's broken ribs, he found himself whispering encouragements that were as much for himself as for the unconscious dog. "Stay with us, Hope. You're stronger than what they did to you." The name had emerged without conscious thought, Hope for the chance they were fighting to give her, and Dr. Rivera adopted it immediately, the anonymous victim becoming an individual with an identity. The minutes stretched endlessly as they worked, each watching the monitor for any sign that their efforts were making a difference. When the first faint improvement appeared, a slightly stronger heartbeat, marginally better oxygen levels, neither celebrated immediately, too focused on maintaining the fragile progress. But as the improvements gradually stabilized over the next hour, cautious relief began to replace their intense concentration. "She's fighting back," Dr. Rivera finally acknowledged, exhaustion evident in her voice. "She's not out of danger, but she's decided to stay with us, at least for now." The simple statement carried weight beyond its medical assessment. This dog, who had every reason to surrender, was choosing to live despite everything. As dawn approached, with hope stabilized but still critical, Dr. Rivera finally allowed herself to sit down, the adrenaline of the emergency giving way to bone-deep fatigue. Mark had refused to leave despite her assurances that she could manage alone, insisting on staying through the night to help monitor their patient. "I found her, I brought her here. I can't just walk away now," he had explained simply, in a tone that brooked no argument. His dedication reminded Dr. Rivera of why she had left her prestigious hospital position. For moments exactly like this, where medicine became personal rather than procedural. Morning light filtered through the clinic windows as Dr. Rivera completed another assessment of Hope's condition, her expression guarded, but no longer holding the acute concern of the previous night. "The next 24 hours remain critical," she explained to Mark, who had stepped outside briefly to call his employer about missing work. "But if she maintains this stability, her chances improve significantly." The conversation was interrupted by a notification sound from Mark's phone, a message from a friend linking to a social media post that had begun circulating overnight. The post contained a dashcam image from a passing truck, the sedan with its passenger window down, the blurry but unmistakable shape of something being thrown onto the road. The driver had been too far away to intervene, but had captured the vehicle's license plate clearly enough to be readable. The post had been shared thousands of times overnight, the collective outrage of animal lovers creating an impromptu investigation that was rapidly identifying Hope's former owners. Mark immediately forwarded the information to the sheriff's office, where he had filed a report before bringing Hope to the clinic. By afternoon, unexpected support began arriving. Locals who had seen the viral post bringing donations of pet supplies, food for the human caregivers, and offers of assistance. The owner of a nearby pet store delivered a care package of specialized foods and supplements for recovery. A retired nurse volunteered to help with monitoring so Dr. Rivera could catch a few hours of sleep. What had begun as one man's roadside rescue was evolving into a community mission, each person contributing what they could to Hope's survival and recovery. Late that afternoon, a watershed moment occurred. Hope's eyes opened fully, her gaze more focused than the brief moments of consciousness during the night. More remarkably, she attempted to lift her head when Mark approached the table, a subtle but deliberate acknowledgement of his presence. "She recognizes you," Dr. Rivera said softly, watching the interaction with professional interest. "That's significant. Sometimes they remember the person who rescued them, form a connection with the first human who showed kindness." Mark felt unexpected emotion tightening his throat as Hope maintained eye contact with him, something unmistakably conscious in her gaze now. The arrival of Sheriff Reyes that evening brought another dimension to Hope's story. The sheriff, a tall woman with compassionate eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, photographed Hope's injuries and collected statements with methodical thoroughness. "We've identified the owners through the license plate in that dashcam footage," she informed them. "What's particularly disturbing is that we've had complaints about animal neglect at that property before, but never enough evidence for a warrant. Hope here might be the key to breaking open a case that could save other animals still in their possession." Sheriff Reyes explained that Hope's physical condition, the combination of fresh trauma and evidence of long-term neglect, provided probable cause for a search warrant that had already been executed. "We found 3 more dogs at the property, all showing signs of neglect similar to Hope's prior condition. All have been removed and are receiving veterinary care." The sheriff's expression softened as she gently stroked Hope's head. "I've seen too many cases where animals like her don't make it. What you two did here..." She paused, uncharacteristic emotion briefly disrupting her professional demeanor. "Well, it's why I became an officer in the first place." As the third day of Hope's recovery began, Mark faced a personal dilemma that had been building since his unplanned detour on that rainy night. His construction job required his return, his apartment waited empty, and his ordinary life needed attention. Yet the thought of leaving Hope felt impossible, a betrayal of the wordless promise he'd made on that rain-soaked roadside. Dr. Rivera seemed to sense his conflict, approaching as he sat beside Hope during a quiet moment. "She's stable enough that I could manage alone now," she offered, then hesitated before adding, "But she responds to you in a way that's helping her recovery. If you want to stay involved, we could figure something out." The simple acknowledgement of the connection forming between rescuer and rescued provided permission for Mark to follow what his heart had already decided. 1 week after being discarded on the highway, Hope reached a critical juncture in her recovery. While her physical wounds were healing steadily, the broken ribs mending, the lacerations gradually closing, her psychological state remained fragile. She would accept food and medication, follow basic commands, and tolerate necessary handling, but always with that same resigned compliance that suggested she was merely enduring rather than engaging with her new reality. Dr. Rivera had seen this pattern before in severely abused animals, a functional recovery that never fully blossomed into genuine living, the animal permanently trapped in a state of learned helplessness despite being physically healed. Mark had restructured his entire life around Hope's recovery, arranging a leave of absence from his construction job and temporarily moving into a small apartment above Dr. Rivera's clinic that she had originally intended as future office space. His presence had become a constant in Hope's daily routine, from morning medications to evening walks where he supported her healing body with a specialized sling. Yet despite his unwavering attention, Hope maintained an emotional distance that worried both humans caring for her, as if she were waiting for the inevitable moment when this kindness would reveal itself as yet another cruel deception. The turning point came unexpectedly on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Rivera had stepped out for a house call, leaving Mark to monitor Hope during what was typically her most restful period of the day. He sat beside her bed reading aloud from a dog training manual. a habit he had developed to fill the silence and provide auditory enrichment even if Hope showed little reaction to his voice. The clinic's front door chimed unexpectedly, a delivery driver with medical supplies, and Mark rose to sign for the package, placing it on a nearby counter before returning to Hope's side. What happened next was so subtle it might have been missed by someone less attuned to Hope's patterns. As Mark settled back into his chair, he noticed she was fully awake, her eyes tracking his movements with unusual intensity. When he extended his hand, as he always did, to let her sniff before touching her, Hope did something unprecedented. She shifted her body slightly toward him rather than remaining motionless. The movement was tiny, barely perceptible, but its significance was enormous. For the first time, Hope had initiated interaction, had made a choice to move toward rather than merely tolerate human presence. Mark remained perfectly still, afraid that any reaction might cause Hope to retreat back into her protective emotional shell. After a moment's hesitation, Hope edged slightly closer again, eventually bringing her nose into contact with Mark's outstretched fingers, not because he had moved to her, but because she had deliberately moved to him. The contact lasted only seconds before she withdrew, but tears sprang to Mark's eyes at the profound significance of this microscopic step toward trust. This wasn't merely physical healing, but the first fragile indication that Hope's spirit might also recover from the profound damage inflicted by human cruelty. When Dr. Rivera returned an hour later, she found Mark still sitting beside Hope's bed, unwilling to disrupt the delicate new energy between them by leaving even briefly. As he described what had happened, trying to convey the importance of what might seem trivial to someone else, the veterinarian listened with complete understanding. "That's the breakthrough we've been waiting for," she said quietly. "When they choose connection over isolation even for a moment, it means she's beginning to trust again. Not fully, not easily, but it's the first step on that path." That evening, as if the small barrier broken earlier had opened the floodgates for more changes, Hope showed interest in her surroundings for the first time, raising her head when the clinic cat walked past her enclosure, watching with alert curiosity rather than the vacant stare that had characterized her previous reactions. During her evening feeding, instead of mechanically consuming whatever was placed before her, she sniffed the bowl first, making a choice to eat rather than simply complying with the offering of food. These might have seemed like normal behaviors for an ordinary dog, but for Hope, they represented a revolutionary reclaiming of agency after a life where choice had been systematically denied. The following morning brought another milestone. When Mark entered the clinic, Hope's tail moved in a brief tentative wag. The gesture was so fleeting he almost doubted he'd seen it, but Dr. Rivera confirmed the observation with barely contained excitement. "That's her first expression of positive emotion," she explained, professional detachment momentarily abandoned in the face of this significant progress. Not compliance, not tolerance, but actual happiness. The simple movement represented hope, crossing an invisible threshold from merely surviving to beginning to live, a distinction that meant everything in terms of her long-term prognosis. By the 10th day, Hope's physical capabilities had advanced alongside her emotional awakening. With her ribs healing and the cast on her front leg allowing for more mobility, she attempted to stand unassisted for the first time, wobbling precariously, but maintaining her balance through sheer determination. Mark remained nearby, ready to support her if needed, but resisted the urge to immediately help, understanding instinctively that this moment of self-reliance was as important psychologically as it was physically. When Hope successfully took 3 steps before carefully lowering herself back to her bed, the achievement was celebrated by both humans as enthusiastically as any medical milestone. That afternoon, Sheriff Reyes returned to the clinic with news that shifted the context of Hope's story. "The case against Hope's former owners is proceeding to trial," she explained. "But I wanted you to know that the other dogs rescued from their property are all improving in foster care. The oldest one, a shepherd mix, has already been adopted by one of our deputies." She hesitated before adding, "The prosecutor wants to know if you'd be willing to testify about Hope's condition when you found her. Cases like this often depend on establishing the severity of the cruelty involved, and your first-hand account would be powerful evidence." Mark agreed without hesitation, though the thought of reliving that rainy night in court testimony wasn't pleasant. What mattered more was the knowledge that Hope's suffering might help ensure justice not just for her, but for other animals who had endured similar treatment. Sheriff Reyes seemed to sense his thoughts, adding, "What happened to Hope was horrific, but her story is having ripple effects throughout the community. Animal control reports are up 30% since her case went public. People are paying more attention, reporting concerns they might have previously ignored." 2 weeks into Hope's recovery, Dr. Rivera conducted a comprehensive assessment that would determine the next phase of treatment. The physical examination showed remarkable improvement: bones healing properly, wounds closing without infection, weight beginning to normalize as proper nutrition took effect. The behavioral evaluation was equally encouraging. Hope now responded to her name, showed appropriate interest in her surroundings, and had begun forming attachments not just to Mark, but to Dr. Rivera and the clinic staff as well. Medically speaking, she's nearly ready for adoption, the veterinarian concluded, though her tone suggested this assessment wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. The word adoption hung in the air between them, neither willing to immediately address its implications. In the world of animal rescue, this transition ordinarily represented success, rehabilitation complete, the animal ready for permanent placement in a forever home. But Hope's case had long since transcended ordinary protocols, and the bond formed between her and Mark had become integral to her recovery. Dr. Rivera finally broke the silence, choosing her words carefully. Traditional wisdom suggests maintaining professional distance in rehabilitation cases, avoiding attachment that might complicate eventual placement. Mark tensed, preparing himself for what he feared would be a gentle but firm reminder that his role in Hope's life was temporary. That proper protocol required separation to allow her to bond with a permanent family. Instead, Dr. Rivera surprised him by continuing, "But I've been doing this long enough to recognize when traditional wisdom falls short. Hope doesn't just trust you, she's building her entire concept of safety around your presence. Separating you now could undo weeks of psychological progress." She paused, watching Mark's expression carefully before asking the question that would change everything. "Have you considered adopting her yourself?" 1 month after being discarded on that rain-soaked highway, Hope lay on a cushioned bed in the corner of Mark's living room, her body still bearing visible evidence of trauma, but healing with remarkable determination. The cast on her leg had been replaced with a lighter brace, allowing for greater mobility, and her once dull coat had begun regaining its natural luster under proper care and nutrition. Most striking was the transformation in her eyes. Where emptiness and resignation had once dominated, there now flickered curiosity, alertness, and increasingly, trust. When Mark entered the room carrying her evening medications disguised in a small piece of cheese, Hope's tail wagged with genuine enthusiasm, a gesture so ordinary for most pets, but extraordinary for this survivor. The adoption paperwork had been finalized 2 weeks earlier, with Dr. Rivera waiving her usual adoption fee and instead asking Mark to make a donation to the clinic's emergency care fund for other animals in crisis. Mark's small apartment had quickly transformed to accommodate his new companion, dog beds in strategic locations, baby gates creating safe spaces, specially designed ramps to help Hope navigate without straining her healing leg. His construction colleagues had even spent a weekend building a custom deck extension that allowed Hope easy access to the small fenced yard behind his building, the group of tough workers becoming unexpectedly invested in creating the perfect recovery environment for the dog whose story had touched them all. Dr. Rivera continued monitoring Hope's progress through weekly checkups, her professional assessment increasingly positive as both physical and psychological healing advanced. "Her recovery exceeds all medical expectations," she remarked during her most recent visit, watching Hope confidently navigate the living room to greet a neighbor who had stopped by. Some animals never fully recover from trauma of this magnitude, but she's showing remarkable resilience. Animals have an extraordinary capacity for healing when given safety, consistency, and genuine care. 3 things you've provided in abundance. The veterinarian didn't verbalize the observation that had become increasingly obvious. That Hope was healing Mark as much as Mark was healing Hope, each filling something essential the other had been missing. The case against Hope's former owners proceeded through the legal system, with Mark's testimony providing crucial evidence during preliminary hearings. His clear, emotionally honest account of finding Hope created a compelling narrative that even the defense attorneys struggled to mitigate. More impactfully, Sheriff Reyes had used information from the case to identify a network of illegal dogfighting operations throughout the county, resulting in multiple additional arrests and the rescue of dozens of animals. What had begun as one act of cruelty witnessed on a rainy night had cascaded into a significant blow against organized animal abuse throughout the region. Hope's story had spread far beyond the local community, picked up by national news outlets and animal welfare organizations as an example of both the worst and best of humanity's capacity toward vulnerable creatures. Donations had poured into Dr. Rivera's clinic, enabling the creation of an emergency response fund specifically for animals requiring intensive care beyond what their owners or rescuers could afford. The Sheriff's Department had implemented new protocols for animal cruelty investigations, with officers receiving specialized training in recognizing and documenting signs of abuse. A simple roadside rescue had created ripple effects that would benefit countless animals in the years to come. The most remarkable aspect of Hope's recovery wasn't physical but social. Her gradual emergence as a dog capable of joy, play, and connection despite her traumatic past. The first time she brought Mark a toy, carrying it proudly and dropping it at his feet with an expectant look, he had been so overcome with emotion, he'd needed to step outside briefly to compose himself. Each new behavior represented not just recovery but resurrection. Hope becoming not just a healed version of her wounded self, but something entirely new. A dog who had survived the worst of humanity and somehow retained the capacity to embrace the best of it. On the day marking 6 weeks since her rescue, Mark took Hope to a special gathering at Dr. Rivera's clinic, a small celebration organized for the network of people who had contributed to her recovery. The clinic assistant who had stayed late to monitor Hope's vital signs during those critical first nights, the retired nurse who had volunteered to help with wound care, the pet store owner who had donated specialized foods and supplements, Sheriff Reyes and her deputies who had pursued justice with unexpected passion, all gathered to witness the transformation of the broken creature they had each helped save. When Hope confidently navigated the room, accepting gentle pets from each person without fear or hesitation, there wasn't a dry eye to be found. During this gathering, Sheriff Reyes pulled Mark aside with unexpected news. "The judge in Hope's case has asked if she could meet her," she explained. "It's unusual, but she's been particularly moved by this case and wants to see the outcome of the rescue efforts before delivering the final sentencing next week." The request reflected how deeply Hope's story had penetrated even the formal structures of the legal system, transcending her status as merely evidence in a criminal case to become a symbol of resilience and second chances that resonated with even those who witnessed tragedy and cruelty daily through their professional roles. The judge's visit took place the following afternoon, a brief informal meeting at the clinic rather than Mark's home to maintain some professional separation between the legal proceedings and Hope's new life. Judge Harriman, a dignified woman in her 60s with a reputation for tough sentencing in animal cruelty cases, knelt on the clinic floor without concern for her formal attire, allowing Hope to approach on her own terms. "I've been on the bench for 27 years, she told Mark quietly, as Hope cautiously sniffed her outstretched hand before accepting gentle scratches behind her ears. Cases like these, where we can actually see healing happen, are rare and precious reminders of why the work matters, even when it feels like we're barely making a dent in the suffering. As Hope continued her recovery, Mark found his own life transforming in unexpected ways. His construction company had assigned him to a special project renovating the county animal shelter, a job his boss had specifically requested him for after hearing Hope's story. The skills he had applied to building homes for humans were now being redirected toward creating better environments for animals awaiting adoption, better ventilation, noise reduction features, more natural light, and spaces designed to reduce stress and promote psychological well-being. His personal experience with Hope's recovery informed design choices that the shelter director praised as revolutionary in their approach to animal housing. Through this shelter renovation project, Mark met Eliza, a dedicated animal behaviorist who specialized in rehabilitating traumatized dogs for adoption. Their professional collaboration quickly evolved into friendship and eventually something deeper, their shared passion for animal welfare creating a foundation for connection neither had expected to find. When Eliza first visited Mark's apartment and witnessed the special bond between him and Hope, the dog who had once feared all humans now curled comfortably against the leg of the man who had refused to let her die alone on a rainy roadside. She understood immediately what had drawn her to him, the rare capacity to commit wholly to healing what others had broken, to see value in what the world had discarded. The one-year anniversary of Hope's rescue arrived on a clear spring day, so different from the stormy night that had brought them together. Mark, Dr. Rivera, Sheriff Reyes, and a small group of those most involved in her recovery gathered for a celebration at the local dog park, a location that would have been unimaginable during those early days when Hope could barely stand, let alone run and play with other dogs. Yet here she was, racing across the grass with surprising speed despite her slightly awkward gait, a living testimony to resilience, to second chances, to the extraordinary capacity for healing that exists in all living beings when given the opportunity to flourish. As the sun began to set on their celebration, Mark found himself standing slightly apart from the group, watching Hope engage in play with another rescue dog. Her body language confident and joyful, no trace remaining of the broken creature he had cradled in his arms that rainy night. Dr. Rivera approached quietly, following his gaze with understanding. She said thoughtfully, "In veterinary school they teach us about medical miracles, the rare cases that defy all prognosis, the unexplainable recoveries that remind us how much we still don't understand about healing. But after 20 years in practice, I've come to believe that the real miracle isn't in the medicine at all." She paused, watching Hope execute a playful bow toward her canine companion. "It's in the capacity of a heart to heal after unimaginable cruelty, to trust again after the most profound betrayal. That's the true miracle we're witnessing here." 2 years after that rainy night when Hope was discarded like trash, her story had transformed countless lives beyond her own. The small gathering at the lakeside park to celebrate this anniversary included faces both familiar and new: Dr. Rivera, Sheriff Reyes, clinic staff, and many community members who had contributed to Hope's miracle. As Mark watched Hope playing confidently with other dogs, her distinctive limping gait the only visible reminder of her trauma, he marveled at the extraordinary journey they had shared. Hope's case had sparked a revolution in the local animal welfare system. The Second Chance Fund, established in her name, had provided emergency medical care for over 50 animals who would otherwise have been euthanized due to cost constraints. More significantly, the county had implemented specialized training for law enforcement officers in recognizing and responding to animal cruelty cases, resulting in a dramatic increase in successful prosecutions and animals rescued from abusive situations. More personal but equally powerful was the transformation in Mark's own life. The carpenter who once lived alone in a sparse apartment now shared a small farmhouse with Eliza, the animal behaviorist he had met during the shelter renovation project. Their home had become a temporary way station for special needs rescue animals, with Hope serving as an unusual but remarkably effective therapy dog for new arrivals. Something about her presence seemed to communicate to other traumatized animals that healing was possible, that the past need not determine the future. The judge who sentenced Hope's abusers to maximum prison terms had invited Mark and Hope to speak at several legal conferences about the importance of taking animal cruelty seriously within the justice system. Hope's before and after photos, displayed on large screens behind them as Mark shared their story, had moved even hardened prosecutors to tears. These presentations had directly influenced the passage of stronger animal protection laws in 2 neighboring states, extending Hope's impact far beyond her individual case. Dr. Rivera had expanded her clinic to include a dedicated rehabilitation center for abused animals, named Hope's Haven, in honor of her most famous patient. The innovative recovery protocols developed during Hope's treatment now served as a model for veterinary practices nationwide, combining physical rehabilitation with behavioral therapy to address the psychological trauma that so often accompanied physical injuries in abuse cases. She often told new clients that Hope had taught her more about healing than years of veterinary school. Perhaps most remarkably, Hope herself had blossomed into a dog whose joy in living served as a daily reminder that even the most profound wounds could heal under the right circumstances. The creature who once lay broken and resigned on rain-soaked asphalt now greeted each morning with enthusiastic energy, her trust in humans fully restored through consistent kindness. Her distinctive appearance, the slight limp, the patch of fur that never quite grew back properly on her shoulder, had become symbols not of past suffering, but of extraordinary resilience. On quiet evenings, when Hope curled contentedly against him on the porch swing, Mark often reflected on how close they had come to never finding each other. Had he left work 10 minutes earlier or later, had he taken a different route home, had he been less attentive to his surroundings, any small variable could have resulted in Hope dying alone on that roadside. The fragility of that connection sometimes kept him awake at night, wondering about all the other animals for whom help never arrived. These reflections had inspired Mark's most recent community project, a network of emergency animal response volunteers ready to mobilize at any hour when strays or injured animals were reported. The group, comprised of ordinary citizens with extraordinary compassion, had already saved dozens of animals that might otherwise have perished before traditional services could respond. Each rescue represented another thread in the expanding tapestry of compassion that had begun with one man stopping on a rainy night when he witnessed suffering he couldn't ignore. As the anniversary celebration wound down, Sheriff Reyes approached Mark with Hope, trotting contentedly beside him. She said thoughtfully, "In 20 years of law enforcement, I've seen how a single act of cruelty can create ripples of harm that affect an entire community. But until Hope, I'd never fully understood how a single act of kindness could create equally powerful ripples of healing." She knelt to gently stroke Hope's head, the dog leaning happily into her touch. "Sometimes I think this is how we change the world. Not all at once, but one rescue, one life at a time." The sheriff's words captured perfectly what Mark had come to understand through his journey with Hope, that compassion was never wasted, even when its ultimate impact remained invisible to the giver. From the simple decision to stop rather than drive past suffering, an entire universe of possibility had unfolded, reminding everyone touched by Hope's story that sometimes the moments that change everything begin with the smallest choice to care when it would be easier to look away.